Prova. Cos'è escluso? Buongiorno. Ah, prova. Ah, prova.
Prova, prova, prova. Prova, prova, sì, 1, 8, sì, sì.
Take your seat, please. Well, probably still someone is going to enter the room. The faculty is so dispersive that it's difficult that everybody find easily the place, but it's important that we start. My first commitment is to give the floor to my Dean Rector. I don't know in which order you are thinking to intervene. The Dean and Director. First, Francesco Kelly, Dean of this faculty, Professor of Statistics.
Yes. Welcome to all you. In our faculty, the name of faculty is Giorgio Foà. Giorgio Foà was a very important economist, and he studied the application of economy, and not only theoretical studies, but application studies of economy. And so we are very, very close to the themes of your conference. We are here to celebrate birthday too, the 20 years of Associazione Bartola. We appreciate very, very much the work of Franco Sotti, of Roberto Esposti. We are very pleased to have you here, and I leave the floor to the rector. Thank you very much for staying here. Thank you.
Director, Professor Sauro Longhi.
Welcome to Ancona. I am in engineering, and my research activity are in robotics and related to the activity in precision farm, for example. But in any way, I read the words in the conference: innovation, productivity, and growth. I think that is very important in this period, in this particular period, because I think that it's very important to propose new solution, new activity for improving in many fields with the sustainability of solution, the possibility to grow the activity. In agriculture, for example, I think that it is a good opportunity for our region, for our country, because we have a different solution, different activity, different opportunity in our country. And I think that it's possible to propose innovation solution for propose an important aspect of growth in this field. Have a good stay in Ancona. The weather is perfect. Any other things is in responsibility of Roberto, and for the weather is my responsibility. Okay. For the other things, Franco and Roberto. Again, stay in Ancona, have a good stay and a good work for this interesting conference. Goodbye.
Well, now let's start with the scientific program of this pre-conference. I'm very proud to coordinate it. It's a pleasure to have you all in Ancona. It is so early in respect to the real conference, and I am very proud also for the guests we have received here in Ancona that have accepted to speak with us. Alan Backwell, Craig Pope, Lauren Clerks, Valentina, evidently, Anna Vagnozzi and Matteo Bartolini. So let's go with the program. Alan Backwell is a close friend of mine because of a long experience of work together. He has been president of the European Association of Agricultural Economists. The president is working with the Institute of European and Environmental Policy in the United Kingdom. He is the author, the coordinator of the research on sustainable innovation produced by RISE Foundation, the foundation chaired or led by Franz Fischler. Well, you have the floor, Alan. Thank you to be here.
Thank you. Shall I operate from here? I'm hoping my presentation is... Does anybody know how to work this?
Come bisogna fare? Forse sta nella cosa. Chiudi. Clerks, Bagnozzi, knowledge intensification.
This one? Yeah. Okay. Perfetto. First of all, thank you, Franco, for this chance to come here to Ancona. I've been here once before, but I didn't have any chance to visit the city, and I had a fantastic afternoon yesterday visiting your beautiful city. I love seaports, and this is a pretty impressive seaport. I'm going to talk about, our theme is knowledge intensification. And I was delighted when Franco invited me to come to this event, not least because I want to hear what Crime Pop and the other speakers have to say, and your experience here in Italy with this, because I have a feeling that some of what I'm going to say, I'm preaching to the converted, that you already know these lessons. This set of ideas I'm wanting to present here, I think what we're all confronting is what in English we refer to as the valley of death between the research community and farming or land management. How do we get the knowledge and the ideas that we're pouring out of research institutes in Europe, but around the world too, into practice on farms? And what are the connections? And in a way, one of the messages I want to put over is that I think some of the language that we're using could be an obstruction to this process rather than a help. And this is the reason why I'm going to focus a lot in my presentation here on the word sustainable, because in some ways I think we're abusing the word, and my diagnosis is that part of the reason why we've been discussing the environmental management of agricultural land for at least 25 years and not making very much progress with it, and I think part of this reason is that we're not communicating, and partly that is due to the language we're using. Now, I hope in the course of this presentation you'll be clear on what I'm trying to say here. So I'm going to start by explaining what I think the phrase sustainable intensification means and where it's come from and how it applies in Europe, because that's the phrase from which knowledge intensification is building. So I want to start there. I want to particularly make the point that even if we accept, and I don't know whether you all do, even if you accept that sustainable intensification describes the development path for global, including European agriculture in future years and decades, even if we accept this idea, it doesn't tell you very precisely what that means to a particular farm system in any particular country or location or region. There are multiple pathways of sustainable intensification, and I want to explain that. And then where I want to get to is 2 points I want to make about knowledge intensification. And one is, to my mind, a research gap, and I want to debate that with you and get your reactions to it. You may say it's already been done, but I don't see the results. And the second is I want to talk about benchmarking farm-level environmental performance. So that's the path I want to take. Where does this phrase sustainable intensification come from? In my perspective, it starts from in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been a tremendous increase in concerns about global food security. I mean, this happened because of the commodity price spikes the first of which was in 2007-8, and then it was repeated 2 or 3 times over the last 7 or 8 years. And this reawoke concerns that there are threats to global food security, particularly given harmful climate change that's taking place, which we don't seem to be controlling. And given the pressure of continuing population growth around the world and the economic growth that's taking place and the dietary changes that occur when countries experience economic growth. Now, that's the context out of which came the prescription that in order to feed the expanding population of the world, this would have to be done by intensifying the use of the existing global agricultural area rather than bringing new area of land into cultivation. And it seems to me that nobody is seriously contradicting that assertion, that statement, that we should sustainably intensify the existing agricultural area. Nobody's contradicting that, because the presumption, which seems to be generally accepted, is that the alternative of bringing more land into cultivation will be more damaging to climate, because it invariably means destroying biomass in forests, or converting wetlands or grasslands into agricultural land, which produces an enormous flux of carbon into the atmosphere. So the prescription is that in terms of biodiversity destruction and climate impacts, that cultivating more land is not the way forward. We have to intensify existing land. However, that has to be done much more sustainably. And this computer's got a mind of its own. It keeps flicking on. And I make these points in the context where most agriculture in the world is economically weak. Now, feel free to contradict me. Write down if you want to contradict that assertion. I would say most European agriculture is economically weak, and most agriculture in the world is environmentally damaging. Farmers don't like that being stated, but I think it's an undeniable truth that agriculture interferes with natural systems. And therefore, to my mind, when you put these thoughts together, sustainable intensification means producing more food and more conservation outputs from the existing agricultural area, and a key to that is improving resource efficiency. Now, this is what I want to tease out. I immediately always find that when I'm making statements about sustainable intensification, given that I started the argument from food security, it's necessary to point out that dealing with global food security is not just a matter of producing more food output. Now, I strongly believe that there is as much to do about the consumption of food in the world, and so that there are strong consumption challenges as well as the production challenges. However, when we talk about sustainable intensification, inherently, we're talking about the sustainable intensification of agricultural production. Here, therefore, if I ignore consumption from here on out in this speech, it's not because I don't think it's important, it's another subject, and I can't deal with everything. Sorry, this has jumped again. The policy instruments and the policy subjects that you deal with for consumption issues are very different than the policy instruments and the policy subjects when you're dealing with the intensification of agriculture and the sustainability of agriculture. So if I don't mention consumption anymore, I've now mentioned it, so I don't want to be criticized for that. Now, take that big concept, which I started at the global level, and apply it to the European Union. What's the relevance of it? Most of the additional demand in the world in the next 30 or 40 years will not arise in Europe. Europe's population, in a third of European member states, the population is already declining. In another third, it will decline in the next 10 or 15 years. By 2030, the middle projection, demographic projections of the UN are that the EU population will be declining. So this demand for additional food output is mostly a non-European affair. Also, I think we should realize that European agriculture is already amongst the most intensive in the world. I've documented that in the report for the RISE Foundation, which is referenced at the end of this report, this presentation. Also, we have to acknowledge that Europe has a high global footprint because we import large quantities of feed and beverages. The development of European agriculture in the 20th century was essentially a matter of intensifying the agricultural area that was already in cultivation at the beginning of the last century. We have not expanded our agricultural area in Europe. For the last 40 years, the agricultural area of Europe has been declining, not rising. We're not bringing forests and wetlands and grasslands into agriculture in Europe anymore. We did that several centuries ago, but that's what we're trying to prevent in some other parts of the world. But the point is that the success of European agriculture over the last century, and I do regard it as an enormous success, this intensification of agriculture has brought with it serious environmental damage. And that's the challenge, is to maintain that productivity. And I stress that we haven't reached the end of technical progress in agriculture by any means. We have to maintain that process, but we have to make a step change in the environmental performance which accompanies it. That's, in my view, the challenge, which is why my conclusion is that when we talk about sustainable intensification of agriculture in Europe, the emphasis has to be on the sustainability word rather than the intensity word. So, in my view, sustainable intensification means finding a development path which simultaneously improves productivity and environmental management of agricultural land. And in a way, there's nothing new about that. This is just simply a pair of words which has come into common usage in the last few years, but it's, in a sense, repeating messages that we've been talking about for a long time. Sorry, that's jumped again. So it's a goal and it's an aspiration, and here's the key, that it requires more knowledge intensity. We have to be more knowledgeable about all of the impacts of what we're doing when we're cultivating agricultural land. So it has to be more knowledge intensive and integrated. If we deconstruct the two words a little more, I find it fascinating that intensity is a ratio. We can measure the intensity of agriculture either as inputs per hectare or outputs per hectare. We can talk about fertilizers or pesticide use. We nearly always focus on the inputs, or at least the enemies of agriculture always focus on the inputs which are potentially, notice my language, environmentally damaging. I mean, not all fertilizers is environmentally damaging. Fertilizers are essential for plant nutrition, whether it comes from mineral sources or organic sources. But intensity is a well-measured, well-known, well-defined concept. I don't find anywhere that intensive agriculture, apart from the farming community itself, is a term of praise. The word has become that intensive agriculture is denigrated. So it's well-defined and measurable, but popularly denigrated. When people speak about intensive or industrial agriculture, they're usually throwing criticism and insults at farmers. They're talking about destroying the earth and torturing animals. I mean, to make the language more extreme. So there's a problem about the word intensity, a problem about the language, because I'm suggesting that we have to further intensify our agriculture. That's the diagnosis, and yet the word is not happily received. I think we have to broaden the way we look at agriculture. We should talk about all of its the potential outputs on the same basis. We only ever use the word production to refer to the production of saleable food and energy and other such products. We don't talk about production of conservation outputs of agricultural management. It's a pity. Agriculture does provide a whole range of eco-services in addition to food and energy, and we should use the word production to them as well, although I don't see much hope of doing that. So intensification, I think, is clearly defined. It should apply to conservation outputs per hectare as well as agricultural outputs per hectare. In many parts of Europe, I think the sustainable intensification path should be to be producing more of the non-food services per hectare: carbon sequestration, flood protection, biodiversity, lapwings per hectare. There's a lot of ratios of intensity where the management of land, the challenge is to increase those ratios, intensify in that direction. But whichever direction sustainable intensification takes us on, knowledge per hectare is the key, knowing how to do it better. And that knowledge will be embodied in the capital of agriculture. That's not just the machinery, but the genetics of our plants and animals, and in the way we manage and treat them. So the knowledge will be embodied in the capital, in the labor and the management. The task, in a way, if you accept the diagnosis that knowledge intensification or sustainable intensification is the way forward, the task is to detoxify or destigmatize the word intensity. And I think that's quite a strong challenge. Now, in contrast, the word sustainable, I've never met anybody who's not in favor of it. Everybody wants everything to be sustainable. It's a much loved concept. The trouble is, we've no idea what it means, how to measure it. This is where I always revert to the Brundtland definition, meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Unsustainable systems undermine their own indefinite continuation. Now, that use of the word sustainability and sustainable, to my mind, is getting horribly diluted. When something is described as non-sustainable, it often means it contains something that I don't much like. And I think that use of the term is not very helpful. Sustainability is nearly always described as three-dimensional. It has an economic, environmental, and social dimension. Farmers like to argue that if the economic dimension is not met, if farms are not viable, you won't get any environmental delivery. And I understand that argument. But equally, the environmentalists will say, if you're destroying the very basis of your production system, it won't be viable for very long. I don't think it helps to try and argue that one is more important than the other. I think what matters is that we get a better fix on what any of them mean. To my mind, and this is one of my critical points, is that if you take the definition literally, it implies the existence of limits or thresholds or tipping points. A system which is unsustainable has reached or is about to reach some kind of threshold beyond which some kind of irreversible change in the production conditions is happening, which prevent the continuation of that system. Now, to my mind, this is an important concept. There's a line of research which talks about planetary boundaries and suggests that the human race is already beyond and is approaching several of these planetary boundaries. And therefore, what we're doing in the world is unsustainable, which is a pretty serious message if it's true. And obviously with climate change, if we get a climate change above 2 degrees this century, it's said that that will unlock some irreversible changes in weather patterns, which will have enormous negative impacts. And my concern is that despite these sorts of pronouncements, there's almost no research on what nature of these irreversibilities or what these thresholds are, or identification of how close we are to them. And I think that's a serious problem. Now, having introduced the concept of sustainable intensification, does it describe a way forward for agriculture? And the answer is no, it doesn't. It's a prescription of a general approach. It does not define a specific answer. Here's a very simple production possibility frontier between environmental services from farming and food and energy on the vertical axis. And we expect that we're mostly operating in the first top right quadrant, where we're producing positive amounts of both. I would suggest that there are plenty of people who suggest that some agriculture is operating in the zone of producing food and energy at positive food and energy outputs and degrading natural capital, and it's therefore operating in the negative quadrant. And if that's the allegation, and therefore we should be moving into that quadrant. Now, generally speaking, a highly virtuous sustainable intensification development path is shown by arrow A, where you both improve the productivity of agriculture and the output of environmental services. It may be that for some farms or farming systems or regions, we have to move in the direction C, improving the environmental services whilst maintaining agricultural output. Or for others, it may be there's little scope to increase environmental outputs, but we could improve their productivity for agricultural outputs. So you can see that there's multiple paths, and which path any particular farm or farming region should be on depends on their initial situation and the characteristics of the region and the problems that it's creating. You see that path D there is a trade-off where we sacrifice some environmental services to produce more agricultural output. E is the reverse, where you de-intensify agriculture, the less agricultural output per hectare and more environmental outputs. One version of that would be conversion from conventional to organic farming. And I've shown the organic farming as further to the right from conventional farming, but less productive. And I think, that broadly speaking, you understand why I've done that. My point is, there isn't a single diagnosis about in which direction to move. Now, let me pose a question. How much of EU agriculture is unsustainable? Is all European agriculture perfectly sustainable? We could continue doing what we're presently doing indefinitely. And I suspect if you talk to most farmers, they would start with the presumption, yep, none of my farm is unsustainable. It's all perfectly, it can carry on forever. Is all of European agriculture unsustainable? Well, if you read some commentators, you would think that's certainly the flavor they give. I think the answer is some. Some of European agriculture is unsustainable, but the important thing is to specify a bit more precisely, a lot more precisely, in what way. Let me make two broad, a very simplified, oversimplified fragmentation of European agriculture, or partition, into two types. I would suggest that there's a lot of commercial European agriculture where the environmental sustainability is questioned. I didn't say that it is unsustainable. There is certainly a problem of soil erosion. There's certainly a problem of declining fertility. There is a measured indices of declining soil organic matter. There's water pollution problem. Again, that's clearly documented. In some regions, it's becoming less of a problem because we're taking action. In other regions, it's still getting worse. There is certainly air pollution from greenhouse gases and ammonia, which is not being tackled. And there's certainly degradation to biodiversity and landscape. All of these are the accusations that are posed towards a lot or some commercial agriculture. Do any of them render it unsustainable in the strict meaning of the word, is my question. I don't know the answer to that. And I would suggest that despite a huge amount of research, very few people who conduct research on sustainability come to the conclusion that I've read a lot of studies that say, and this system is unsustainable. They pose the question at the front, but they don't answer it, but by the end. So I'm letting that thought hang. There's another big sector of European agriculture, big in the amount of land it occupies, probably approaching half of the land area is classified as less favoured in the European Union. These are marginal farming areas where the problem there is less, I didn't say not, I said less, the environmental sustainability, it's their economic and social sustainability. These are areas with non-viable holdings, very high dependence on subsidy payments that are threatened, and associated with land and village abandonment. Now, there may be significant areas that embrace, I'm not suggesting all of agriculture is in one or other of these categories, that agriculture is much more complex than that. But what I'm suggesting is that the nature of the unsustainability we need to dig into a bit more. How do we identify the thresholds of environmental unsustainability? Well, clearly, there will be some parts of Southern Europe which, if global warming continues and European warming continues, will become unfarmable because of temperature rise and potentially associated water shortage. I mean, that is not inconceivable. I don't know whether we've got areas of Europe where salting is occurring or acid conditions are developing that threatens crop and hence livestock production. there are certainly questions about the loss of soil and organic matter oxidation. How you define thresholds for this is where we haven't made much progress, is my suggestion. There are plenty of warning indicators, and we measure a lot or most of these things. But my suggestion is that there are very few identifiable thresholds. In the project we did for the RISE Foundation, Professor Winfried Blum from Vienna has devised a way of trying to categorize European soils as to whether they have gone past the point of sustainability. And he comes out a figure with, I think it was 5 or 6%, and he identifies these geographically. But I think that sort of work needs extending for other factors as well. Economic sustainability is even more difficult to define. Clearly, it's not a matter of individual business failure. To the individual business, it matters if his business fails. To the nation, it matters less. I didn't say it didn't matter at all, because if an individual business runs into financial trouble and has to give up, the assets will pass to others. And so this does not pose a threat to food security. It poses a threat to the family whose business has failed, but in a way, in our competitive economies, business failure is part of keeping businesses on their toes. So therefore, the threshold of economic sustainability is not business failure, it's presumably asset or land abandonment, or land that's farmed to destruction. There are not many examples of that, but there are examples of that in other parts of the world. I've mentioned them on the slide. There's plenty of warning indicators: low incomes, non-viable loss-making holdings, high dependence on subsidy. The interesting thing is that in other parts of the economy, if you've got businesses like traditional shipbuilding in Britain that was loss-making, dependent on subsidy, eventually governments pull the rug from it and say, we're not subsidizing it anymore. We don't do that with farming. Why not? And it seems to me the answer is nearly always environmental or social, which points to the appropriate, I think, policies and diagnosis. I think social unsustainability is even more difficult to define, either the thresholds or the indicators. So what are the development paths for commercial agriculture? It seems to me this is the bad news, that there are some areas and farming systems where the conclusion may be they simply have to reduce intensity of output to reduce the intensity of negative environmental impacts. And I'm thinking particularly of nutrient overload. Now, the Netherlands has gone some way in dealing with this. It's one of the few that has in actually reducing farm output per hectare, reducing concentration of production. But there's still a chronic issue there. And in a way, these are extremely difficult to deal with. Why? Because the people who are managing those businesses have not accepted that they're unsustainable. And this is where I think the language starts to get in the way, that they think these businesses can continue indefinitely. It may not be desirable that the water's polluted, but we can live with it, and we have done. The difficult issue there, and particularly, when we turn to policy mechanisms, you would say, well, these should be regulated. Well, we have regulation. We've got water regulation, nitrate regulation. We said, don't enforce it. It's been in place for a long time. And we pay for compliance with that regulation. We've been paying farmers for compliance with this regulation for a decade now, since 2014, explicitly, with very little impact on some of these indices. So we've got a problem here. However, I think that category is relatively small. I don't know how big. For most of commercial agriculture, this is a matter of reducing negative externalities and increasing positive externalities. And in a way, that's been the debate for the last 15 or 20 years, how to arrange the incentives to bring about that behavior, to get us onto what you describe as a sustainable development path. Now, in my moments of optimism, and I'm coming towards the sort of bit towards the future about knowledge intensification, In my moments of optimism, I see data like this. This came from some German study. This shows the variability of yield and the variability of biodiversity, very crudely measured, numbers of plant species on a series of plots in Germany. And not unsurprisingly, there's tremendous variation in both dimensions. That for any level of agricultural productivity, there's a huge variation, a five-fold variation in biodiversity. Or for any level of biodiversity, there's a 2- or 4-fold variation in agricultural productivity. And it's the existence of that variation that gives me hope that if we understood more about why some highly productive farms are also more biodiverse, or why some highly biodiverse farms are also productive, and we understood more about that, what causes that variability and how much of it can be managed, this is where the knowledge comes in, we can encourage more of our production to move towards that frontier in the virtuous direction. I think the development paths for marginal agriculture I'm going to skip. Why are we struggling with this concept? I think it's because environmentalists misinterpret intensity and they see it only in negative terms, and farmers are not convinced that their farming is unsustainable. So there's a fundamental, in a sense, evidence gap on both sides. And as far as the unsustainability is concerned, my suggestion is that because there's very little convincing evidence to show that farmers are wrong in thinking that what they're doing is sustainable, then there's, and this is because there's almost no attention to specifying environmental limits. So here's my messages for knowledge intensification, my 2 favorite things that we need to be doing. I think we have to push much harder the real meaning of the word sustainable. Use it less in the direction of trying to improve environmental performance, and there's nothing wrong with that. More in the direction of detecting or distinguishing between systems which truly are unsustainable, cannot continue indefinitely, and systems which probably could. In other words, to understand and characterize the limits. And this is an issue both of conceptualization as well as empirical identification. And I think the work that Blum did on soils is indicative of a way of going about this, but it has to be done for all the environmental media in addition to soils, and preferably at the farm or field level. Because it seems to me that if an individual land manager knew or was informed that what he's doing is not capable of continuation for more than a decade or two, in other words, it threatens the lives of his children or grandchildren, I think most of them would pay attention, or might. So the question is, at what, if any, point in soil erosion, organic matter decline, phosphorus concentration, temperature rise, precipitation, fall in precipitation, loss of pollinators or other biodiversity, which of these threaten productivity? Is there any way of determining this? At the moment, the nearest thing we've got to limits are regulatory limits. It's nitrates in water and the condition of our water systems. And those regulatory limits were largely politically determined and are presumably thought to be and hoped to be inside the technical limits. That's the first challenge. The second challenge, and this is the point I finish on, is the knowledge exchange challenge. My observation over my career as an agricultural economist is that agricultural economics contributed enormously to farm management economics by developing good measurement and benchmarking of farm economic performance. Every kind of agricultural activity, we have the appropriate measures of productivity which are regularly communicated to farmers. And we've been doing this for a long time now, either through public or private means. And yet we've hardly started to do that on environmental performance. So farmers who are commercially minded and who go and look at this sort of literature know how to improve the performance of their dairy herd. And they've got lots of indicators to help them do it. The policy towards agriculture has changed its emphasis in the last 20 years to emphasize environmental land management. but the management information to help farmers do that has not kept up with that. And so I think I mean, apart from energy efficiency and perhaps water use efficiency, and we're beginning to now start measuring greenhouse gas emissions and communicate that at farm level, we have to extend and broaden that kind of work to provide usable indicators and benchmarks of performance at farm level. And it does seem to me that I've been suggesting this for a long time, that our farm accountancy data network, which is the core data set at farm level in Europe, still doesn't embrace this and really ought to. So my conclusions are sustainable intensification is a useful globally based concept for a better balance between food production and the environment. The EU emphasis has to be to maintain agricultural productivity growth, about which I've said very little, and it's not because I don't think it's important, I just focus on these other issues, but there has to be a step change in environmental performance. And if we're going to stick to using the word sustainability, I think we have to do more research on identifying and communicating the existence and location of thresholds at the farm level, which is missing knowledge. And this means benchmarking farm environmental performance in a way that is comprehensible to farmers. And now I'm sure we're going to hear in the other presentations people who are doing exactly this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alan. Very interesting, your presentation and your analysis of what sustainable intensification means. Well, let me just share the web streaming users. We have the website of AgriRegion Europa that provide information on how to connect with this room. This is just due. The word is to Krijn Poppe. Krijn is a researcher at LEI, the Dutch Institute of Research on Agriculture Economics, and is also the head of the Standing Committee for Agricultural Research and the ACIS, the Agricultural Knowledge Intensification System. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to Franco for bringing me here. We are old friends from the European Association, and he has argued for 20 years that I should come to Ancona, so you succeeded. Thanks. Alan has given an impressive talk, I think, on where we should go with knowledge intensification. I will try to add to that. The question is our system that delivers the knowledge, the agriculture knowledge and innovation system, is that fit for purpose, and can it deliver what Alan wants it to deliver? I think I personally agree with a lot of the things that he said. I do this in my role of being co-chair of the SCAR Strategic Working Group on Agriculture Knowledge and Innovation Systems. Very shortly, for you who do not know the SCAR, that stands for Standing Committee on Agricultural Research. It's one of the Brussels committees shared between DG Research and DG Agri. And it's the group that essentially makes, for instance, the work program of Horizon 2020 and some of the projects to which, the calls to which you submit, perhaps even today, your proposals. This SCAR has a couple of working groups that, for instance, make foresights. What should research do in the next years? The SCAR is, since I think 10 years, not only responsible for research, but about 10 years ago, the ministers of agriculture said, you should think more about innovation and not only on research. And that led the SCAR to start up a working group called AIEAA to think about this issue of linking research, science to innovation. We made 2 reports from which I cite a few slides, and you are the first to see some of the results of the work we are currently doing and which will be published at the end of the year. So in that sense, you're a test audience, because I have to do that next week on the Expo in Milan with DG Agri. So I'm very much looking forward to your comments. I will talk shortly on a couple of concepts that we have introduced or that we use in our first 2 reports that are published on science, research and development, and innovation, 3 related animals that are different. Then on ACIS, then on, for those who are not familiar so much with the Common Agriculture Policy and the European Research Policy, I shortly explain the European Innovation Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture and Productivity. And actually the work that we did in the ACIS was backing up those policy ideas and try to prevent some of the more or less productive ideas based on research of some of the colleagues, including the next speaker, I think. And then I look to 3 future scenarios for this ACIS. That's the new thing. So if we talk on science, research and development and innovation in partnership, we actually make this difference because science we use, we try to use very much for, let's say, the basic science, that is a science-driven knowledge development. You very often see there a linear model. You don't take farmers into the laboratory to develop nanotechnology. That doesn't make a lot of sense. What is important is crossovers between sectors. Let's be honest, a lot of our technology, for instance, in agriculture, genetics is an exemption, but if it comes to other technologies, we don't invent drones in agricultural universities, do we? That's the American military, or that's California who does that. Then the other thing is research and development, which is very often for competitiveness reasons or for social challenges that we see in society, and where in, at least outside agriculture, business plays very often quite a role, and where you see the last 10 years a lot of private-public partnerships coming up in Europe, as look to, for instance, the bioeconomy thing, or in ICT, but also in national member states. Innovation is something we see much more as a local thing. It's much more on prototypes, on localization, these big events. Can you use drones in Portugal? No, it's still forbidden. Everybody does it. In the Netherlands, you're allowed to use drones, but you have to make sure that you do an exam that they are not hijacked like an airplane. You very often see that farmers or food chain partners are co-created. It also has to do with successful innovation, very often with a business model, with finance. If you go into healthcare farming, you not only have to do technical innovations, but it are mainly market innovations, the same in short supply chains. And if you take the government perspective, a lot of my colleagues don't like that, but if you would like to have innovation, you not necessarily have to have more science. Sometimes regulation works, or deregulation works. There can be innovative procurement by the government. So there are other rules, other policy instruments to promote innovation. And we argue that one of them, and I come back to that, linked with, let's say, the localization, is learning and innovation networks and probably innovation brokers. And I'm quite sure that one of the next speakers will provide more detail. So that is the distinction we make to make the world in Brussels a little bit less confusing when it comes to research and innovation. The second is the ACIS, Agriculture Knowledge and Innovation System. And that is very often equalized also by us with extension, education and research, where in many cases I think education is not so well linked to research and extension as we would like to see it linked. But if you think about it, they not only innovate or try to innovate farmers, but they also work to other partners in the food chain. And for some innovation processes, I think that the other part, that the partners in the food chain, take the input industry, be it Monsanto or John Deere or the breeding genetics cooperative, is probably much more influential to the behavior of a farmer than research or extension. And the same you find at the side of food processors with all their global gaps and their contracts. The retailers, consumers, animal welfare. I think in Northwestern Europe, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands is driven by consumers and retailers in link to NGOs. So if you look to if you want to promote innovation and develop new ways to make farming more sustainable, I think you have to see the whole picture and also try to incentivize not only farmers, but the whole system to make it more sustainable. And sometimes that can be done by the Common Agriculture Policy, and perhaps sometimes you have to make a deal with retailers on how they contract with farmers. There's now quite some research, partly documented in our reports, but also from some European projects like Solinza and recently ProAkis and Impresa, that AKIS are quite different between countries, regions and sectors. There's already 10 years ago, I think, a study by Pierre Labarde from INRA, who looked to how advisory services extension in Europe is organized, and that's very, very different. In the Netherlands, we don't have any public extension anymore for at least 10 or 15 years. You now see in nearly all countries of Europe or regions that there are mixes between public and private advisory services. And that's just one example how different not only the objectives of the system are, which are very different even between, for instance, Baden-Württemberg, which has a multifunctional agriculture because they earn their money with Mercedes and other big companies, and Schleswig-Holstein in the north of Germany, which is essentially an agricultural land area. So it's not only the objective, it is also how it is historically organized. The second point is that some countries have restructured their AKIS considerably or are still doing that. In the Netherlands, we have seen the forming of Wageningen University and Research, which combines applied research with academic research and teaching. The Danish have gone through to a more regional thing. I learned recently from my colleagues here at AIEAA in Italy that they have been thrown into CREA, which is what happened 10 or 15 years ago in the Netherlands by forming one structure for all the applied research institutes. So there are restructurings, also based on the budget cuts and the fact that there are less civil servants who have to steer the system, so they want larger entities, I think, that they can govern. Then the third one is that AKIS components are governed by quite different incentives. We like to present AKIS as one system. If you go into the parts, then the incentives for a researcher are quite different from those of a teacher in a school, which is paid on the number of students, or at least the school is paid on that. And they are different from incentive systems, for instance, in the extension service. So if you're in institutional economics, or you would organize a food chain, you would not accept that. You would not say, well, let's have different incentives for all the parts of a linear system. So sometimes you wonder why it still works. Then, and that's based on a system approach to innovation and on work done in the Netherlands, in France, in other countries, also experience. We argue in our reports that innovation is very much driven by interaction in networks. Innovation as a process has has very strong learning aspects. You have to learn, or people in a food chain or in a certain land area have to learn to do new things. and to do that together at the same time. And of course, you can try to force them to do that with regulation or with mandates. But well, as we are looking to the ACIS, we study mainly how you can do that by advisory services, by incentives from the food chain. And there we see that learning networks with a certain theme, where different actors collaborate to solve a certain innovation challenge, that can help. There have been programs in the Netherlands, in France over the last 15 years who set up that type of groups and have done quite interesting and successful things. And if you look to the members of such groups, diversity counts. If you only bring farmers together, do it even worse, bring only dairy farmers together. Then they start talking on cows. You should mix, in some cases, a big dairy farmer with a big arable farmer if you want to talk to them about sustainability. Because, well, you have to bring new expertise in such a group. So mix farmers, researchers, food industry, NGOs, sometimes government officials, in what you need to solve that challenge. Well, this type of thinking is reflected in the European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture, or you could say it's the backup, the scientific basis for taking those measures in the policy. And there, DG Agri has invented operational groups. And in research, we have now thematic networks and multi-actor projects. And I think most of you in the room will know that jargon. These are a couple of slides from Inge van Oost from DG Agri. To explain it, operational groups can now be funded in, for instance, the second pillar of the Common Agriculture Policy. They should be built around concrete innovation projects. And you should look for a combination of different competences, practical as well as scientific, that implement a certain project on a innovation challenge, and they should be action and result oriented. And the idea is to have co-creation and cross-fertilization. Always, nowadays, they like in Brussels the term interactive innovation. And the funding can come from different sides. It can come from the second pillar, it can come from private funds, structural funds, national funds. They can even be combined. So such an operational group is a group that really works on an innovation, on a challenge. So it's not a leader group, it's not a stakeholder network or a thematic coordination group or the discussion group that meets every 2 weeks in the local cafe. That's also interesting, but that is not an operational group as we see it. It's a group of actors that really work together and change their own working methods, their own technology to realize something which is more sustainable, whatever that may mean. And that is facilitated from Brussels with a certain service point that tries to link the groups, and that with ICT methods and in other ways, and that also brings together about 10 focus groups together who look to certain things like short supply chains, soil fertility, and see what the know-how is in the different areas, what the challenges are, and try to promote interaction between the operational groups in the different regions. Then the second instrument in Brussels is the thematic networks under Horizon 2020, which are projects that involve all stakeholders and map the state of the art of the existing scientific knowledge and the best practices, and then develop end user material. So things that go to farmers or others. If you ever submit a proposal, don't make the mistake that you think all the work packages should be led by academics, because that is not involving all concerned stakeholders. It's really the idea that on an equal basis you have work packages, activities done by advisory services, even by farmers organizations, as well as by academics, researchers. And the same is more or less true for multi-actor projects, which are more research-oriented, but also in a co-creation atmosphere where you have a clear role for the different actors to create solutions to a certain challenge, and not in a linear way, but really starting also with the challenges that farmers and others in the food chain see in a certain area, in a certain production methods, in a certain type of farming, and say we would like to work on better measuring soil quality or biodiversity loss, or coming up with methods to do that, and then taking these approaches and the knowledge from the ground, so to say, into the research and back again. Okay, then the future. We are currently working on how should the AIEAA look like in the future, or how could it develop, how should it develop. That is actually linked to the fact that the SCAR is once again doing a foresight analysis. Every 2 or 3 years there's a foresight, and currently the SCAR is doing a foresight in a group led by Erik Matthijs from Leuven University, and they come up with a foresight not on agricultural research, but on the bioeconomy. And they create 3 scenarios. It's a classical scenario study. One is a modesty scenario, nearly business as usual. One is on bioeconomy scarcity. So there is a certain scarcity, and all the things that we produce in agriculture should go to food. And then there is a bio boom scenario where you say, well, there is due to new techniques and there is a boom in agricultural production, and there is also a huge demand from, let's say, the chemical or the pharmaceutical industry for new types of products, and that brings agriculture much more integrated to other industries. That's roughly the 3 scenarios with which they will come up. And we try to look how the AIEAA could develop in the future, partly linked to these scenarios, partly in general. I should say that we, in our group, in the SCAR, are very much influenced not only by the thinking on bioeconomy, but with the ICT revolution. And perhaps we overstress that. I found a picture from 1961 in an American cartoon series on future fuels, and that talked already on sensors and the factory farm and a very industrialized farm. But I think that if you look to the things that are happening in ICT currently, with milking, dairy robots, with prescriptive farming, as they do this in the US, contract farming, that the big data analysis, if you gather all the data in benchmarking like Ellen was suggesting, then you go probably to new systems of data analysis and also to provide information to farmers. So we did a classical, I always call them shell scenario study. We identified more than 100 drivers, we classified them, then built stories around them. We had a survey of 120 people in Europe in this domain that classified these variables as, are they likely to happen? For instance, breaking down of Europe with the euro, or big climate change effects. How likely are these drivers of the future? And what would be the effect on AIEAA? Would that be small or big? And then, of course, you have a group of drivers that you think these are very likely to happen and have a big effect. So they are the basis of these scenarios, but it's also interesting to see to look to a number of drivers that are very unlikely or seen by the current generation as very unlikely, but if they would happen, they would have big effect. That means that we will come up with 3 scenarios. One is a high-tech scenario, where we see a strong influence of new technology, which is owned by multinationals. A few weeks ago, Google invested $15 million in a network for farm comparison in the US, and that was framed as being a counter effect to the Monsantos and the John Deeres who own all these data of farmers. This is a future of driverless tractors, contract farming, rural exodus, but also a very strong Europe, the United States of Europe, to counterbalance these multinationals. It's a rich society with a lot of inequality within cities, for instance, but where the sustainability issues that Alan talked about are solved by this precision farming technology. And it's a bio-boom scenario in that sense. The second scenario we dreamed up is self-organization, where you have more or less the same ICT developments, but where in the high tech they are linked to ANS and Mr. Snowden. Here they are more linked to the wiki and being disruptive, the end of retail, because you get totally different business models. The current banks could probably disappear if you look to this blockchain technology and bitcoins, where they lead to much more self-organization, a Switzerland type of bottom-up democracy, and more short supply chains with a regional approach. In that scenario, we think European institutions are weak. It's more the regions and the cities that rule, and you will see quite a lot of inequalities between the regions depending on their endowments. And then third, a collapse scenario where you see big climate change effects, mass migration, political turbulence, leading to collapse of institutions and European integration, and where it's much more a regional self-sufficient scenario with bioscarcity, and where the technology development probably becomes dependent on science, basic science in China, India, and Brazil. This is about 2040, yeah? This is not about tomorrow. Of course, scenarios in reality are about today, but we propose them for 2040. If you see these 3 scenarios, and scenarios are outside developments which you more or less cannot influence, perhaps you could argue that perhaps some of the things could be influenced by the European Commission, but certainly not by the city of Ancona or the University of Ancona. If you take these 3 scenarios, it's always attractive that you say, I choose one, but that is not what you can do with a scenario. They are external. You only can make your system robust, resilient to what you need if one of these scenarios would happen. And what we did is we tried to think how the core elements of the AIEAA, the universities and the applied research would develop in these scenarios. If you have a high-tech scenario, we think that you will end up with a few big life science universities. In that scenario, I think the University of Berkeley, UC Davis, Google, and Monsanto and Apple are very well positioned, I think, to lead also a big data thing in agriculture. You will see, they will train the managers of those companies. And this is a world of massive online courses that take the best students, innovation in universities, third generation model, not only teaching and research, but also innovation as a goal of research. You will probably see that applied research will more or less disappear because these big companies like Unilever have their own lab. You have, the same is probably true for farm research stations, collective funding, like in levy boards probably ends, and you have advisory services that are carried out mainly by these, let's say, multinational corporations, or even with computer-generated software like Watson from IBM. In the self-organization sphere, you will see, we think, many regional universities that specialize. For cereal production, you go probably to Cambridge or to Schleswig-Holstein. For multifunctional agriculture, to Baden-Württemberg. For organic, to Austria. They are more or less comparable to what we see today, teaching and research. We think that in such a regional approach, applied research would probably be on the same campus like education, that you will see more interaction between education, higher education, and higher research and applied research. And you will see a mix of public and private commercial advisory organizations. In the collapse scenario, you have reduced public funding. Universities struggle to keep alive, and they mainly concentrate on teaching. A lot of the basic research is probably outside Europe. Applied research becomes then relatively important because it gives more direct results, and advisory services probably disappear. Local do-gooders, lead farmers are the source of knowledge as well as donors. But you always have to ask when you do a scenario analysis is, does it help for a strategic conversation? That's the only thing that counts. Does it help to understand a little bit more this fuzzy, uncertain future? And could it help you to take decisions on the current system? When I asked this in our group in Brussels, one person in the group said, yes, it does, because if I now travel in Europe, I see certain tendencies in the system that are written down here. If you take the high-tech scenario, go to the Netherlands. If you take self-organization, go to Italy, and collapse, go to Macedonia and Kosovo. And that is exaggerated probably, but it is a way of thinking on what are the developments if you have to make decisions on how you organize a system that has to deliver results in 10, 15, 20 years. So the question is then, one of my last slides, can we make the system more robust? We argue that we have to experiment more with public-private partnerships, that we should also welcome regions, cities, and NGOs as partners. I think one of the effects in the Netherlands is that public-private partnerships, but you also see it in Brussels, I think with ICT, there's a lot of private interests from the companies, but I think from the public side, we should counterbalance that. And also, if you talk about sustainability, learn the commercial interests to understand the worries of the NGOs and the other way around, and to quote Ellen, to say, well, to come on the same level on what sustainable intensification is. We think that we should create crossovers with other sectors, bioeconomy, energy, food and health. If it comes to consumption, there are big issues there. Logistics, ICT. That there is a big role for transdisciplinary work, for social dialogue between the different partners, for governance issues, for this new world. And I think that it's also quite interesting to create research infrastructures that foster the collaboration in the European research area and that support the research. So a certain split between the research infrastructures, the experimental farms, for instance, in dairy farming, that we could link in Europe to work together. Some of the farmers, they are now in these programs and they complain that the Irish and the Dutch do the same trials without knowing that from each other. It's very interesting that farmers now bring researchers together and say, hey guys, you do the same things, why do you do that? Let's talk to each other, can it be done more efficiently? Can we learn from what the Irish do in the pastures for the Netherlands and the other way around? So I think that it makes sense to link the research infrastructure better, and then perhaps that makes it easier also to combine, I think, things in research. As I said, we should not forget education in the innovation system. And there is, of course, the collaboration with international partners, the US, China, India. And we think that there is a point that we should much better integrate agricultural research for Europe and agricultural research for development. There are differences, but in a lot of cases, it's the same methods that are developed, it's the same methodology, the same way of thinking. And there are a couple of issues there, I think, where we, on one hand, could economize, and on the other hand, could inspire each other by what is happening there. Role for the EU policy, I think in science, countries are small, so there are big spillover effects, pool funds, compete or collaborate, whatever you wish, with the other continents, and help this reorganization process in Europe. A lot of regions are struggling with budget cuts, and I think that we should not close too much, but that we should see if we can economize by making it more efficient. In research and development, collaborate with the food business, but also experiment in collaboration with the civil society and cities. There are several cities now that have a food policy. And then, as I said in the beginning, the innovation that is essentially a regional thing. It's about dialogue, transdisciplinary, but it's important, I think, to organize a certain spillover, and we have the common agricultural policy anyway, so let's use this second pillar to solve some of the issues that we face. And then we should not forget learning and monitoring of the whole thing. And I hope that that really leads to an EU market for research and innovation with, like farmers, also researchers, I think, should have a good level playing field, where you have probably common research infrastructures where data are pooled, for instance, and that help to reduce cost and help to introduce e-science. All these farmers now have real-time data. All our models in universities are still working with annual data. That's strange, isn't it? And that does not mean that national and regional authorities should give up their strategy or agenda setting. On the contrary, if they have a good strategy and it's agenda setting on their priorities and their strengths in research, they could adopt such procedures that they could make more out of collaboration with other regions. I would like to leave it there.
Thank you, Krijn. Thank you very much. You have mentioned the importance of the new ACIS system and the European Innovation Partnership for agriculture. Let me just mention the window of innovation that we have introduced in our website of Agri-Region Europa, the Italian Review of Agriculture Economics that we manage here in Ancona. This is not an advertisement, it's just a presentation of the future speakers, because Valentina Materia is the next speaker together with Lauren Clerks. Valentina is associate professor in the knowledge and technology innovation group at Wageningen University. Lauren Clerks is assistant professor. Sorry, Lauren Clerks is associate professor of knowledge technology innovation group, and Valentina is assistant professor of management study group. Sorry of the inversion. You have the floor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think economists will always appreciate that they get two for the price of one. So we'll do a duo presentation today. I will do the first part, and Valentina will do the closing of our presentation. So I will talk about sustainable innovation for sustainable farmers, strategies, network, and policies. I think our presentation builds nicely on the presentations of the previous speakers. and we'll deepen a little bit these issues, and we'll also give some experience from some real-life projects. So, well, what we have been discussing this morning, the importance of networks for sustainable agriculture has been recognized. It requires quite a lot of learning at different levels between farmers within their value chain context. Also, the policy level is involved. Sometimes regulations need to be adapted, incentives need to be created. So you really need this network approach. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be together at all times, but you need to create those interactions. However, how to organize this is highly influenced by how these AIEAs are organized. As Krijn said, not all the national AIEAs in the different countries in the EU are similar. Some AIEAs have much more experience with organizing interaction at different levels, others have less. And this also has implications for how you want to operationalize policies, which are kind of similar for the whole European Union in terms, for example, of the European Innovation Partnership. So I will talk a bit about this, some experience we've had in European projects with applying such a network approach. And then Valentina will end with some implications for policies. So I will start with Solinza. And I must say, I got these slides, or most of them, from Hydro Masic. She was a project partner. She's from FIBEL. And this project, it ended a couple of years ago, and it was about supportive learning and innovation networks for sustainable agriculture. So this project really was aimed at creating new initiatives or supporting existing initiatives who work on different kinds of practices to make agriculture more sustainable, both in the economic, environmental sense, social sense. So this project was based on ideas around sustainability transitions. Some of you might have seen this very nice model earlier, others might have not, so I will briefly explain it. This is a model which has been constructed on basis of historical analysis of innovation processes. It sees innovation as an evolutionary process with co-evolution between technology, social structures, institutional structures, also with competition between technologies, and then from that competitions, dominant designs, dominant structures emerge. So there are three basic levels here. And the upper level is the socio-technical landscape, big developments in society, in the world, which influence the space for innovation, the need for innovation. For example, climate change, you could call the landscape development. It is urging us to develop climate smart agriculture, also provides a window of opportunity because it's on the agenda. There's also financial support for it. At the middle of the picture is the socio-technical regime. That is the current way of doing things. It's the current system. And so in many countries in Europe, we have developed quite an industrial way of producing. This is also supported by a whole system of inputs, outputs, markets, scientific structures, which are also created and have established for supporting the system. We now want to change it, but obviously that's not easy because there's lots of sunk investments, there's lots of deeply rooted structures. It's not easy to change it. But there are several niche innovations at the bottom level, alternatives which try to change it. Those are sometimes alternative movements who have a different idea on how we should do agriculture, and they try to become stronger, grow, and overthrow or change the regime. You see that in agriculture, but for example also in energy. If you talk about fossil fuels, we now have niches on solar panels, we have niches on biofuels, we have niches on hydrogen energy, we have niches on wind energy, and all of them are looking at can we become a dominant way of producing energy and move out fossil fuels. So the idea of Linza was how can we support these niche networks, those alternatives? But also, how can we support networks from within the regime who also want to change the regime from within? So in this project, there were different Linza in different countries, all the different project countries, the UK, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, France. I won't mention them all. Most of these were existing networks who wanted to make a change, and the project studied these networks. And they all had a sustainability goal. They wanted to improve sustainability of production systems of value chains through different ways. And that's also quite central in this model. The different niches also compete. And in the end, we will see one new dominant model or a couple of new dominant models emerge. So what are the features of a Linza? Well, we identified 6 in this Solinza project. There's a dynamic balance of diversity and commonality. It's also refers to what Krijn says. You need to sometimes bring in new types of actors to create different visions. On the other hand, you also need to have sufficient commonality for people to learn together. That's quite a difficult balance. If you look at innovation studies, you need to find a balance between hard networks with high social capital, tight linkages, and soft networks, which are much more open, but maybe do not have the same level of trust and familiarity in working with each other. This can be enhanced, this dynamic balance, and bringing these people together by getting a shared goal of innovation. And getting a shared goal of innovation is by no means easy, because different parties have different interests. So this is really a negotiation, and such innovation or such goals, such visions, while important, are also constantly renegotiated. But it's important to create such visions within Linza. Obviously, you need mutual engagement, you need participation, commitment. That doesn't mean that all actors have to participate to an equal extent. Often, network learning is all about sitting together in a room, chatting happily. It's not about that. It's about orchestrating a broader network which has a core, but also sub-networks. But the important thing is that you keep things together and that you make the different lines connect. For example, if you have a sustainability innovation which requires on-farm level change in practices, if that is influenced by policies or by value chain arrangements, for example, to pricing mechanisms, you will need to create a sub-network working on that topic to enable the on-farm level change. And so you need to manage sub-networks. For that, you need a minimal level of governance and organization of a network. You shouldn't suppose that those networks can self-organize everything and do that orchestration. This also has implications for support. Sometimes they need some support in this orchestration. Reflexivity is very important. Innovation networks move in an environment which changes. Niches, if they try to come up with alternatives for regime practices, that regime will also change. They need to incorporate that. This landscape also changes. Information constantly changes, settings change. If they just stick to an original plan and don't do adaptive management of that innovation process, their solution might become obsolete by the time it gets out of it. And so they need to reassess objectives and evaluate also the performance of what they propose as a sustainability innovation. But it's very important that also these core values are really ingrained in this network. They really need to believe in it. It's very important for innovation. You need to have some champions who really believe in these types of changes. So what we saw in the project in Solinza is that there are different kinds of networks. Some are really grassroots movement. They can be diffuse networks, which have few links to the formal AIEAA, the formal support structures. And that can be good, because sometimes the formal support structures also have their own lock-in, and they are not open to new kinds of agriculture. For example, when we started with organic agriculture in the 70s, they were seen by most scientists as some retarded hippies with big beards, not doing serious work. They were not accepted, they were not supported. Over time, this support has grown. Now you see departments of organic agriculture, you see organic agriculture principles being fed into closed cycle agriculture in the conventional scene. But often these deviant practices are not recognized by the formal system. On the other hand, especially when regime players, for example, there was also the Bavarian Society of Farmers as a Linza, they are very well established. They already have good connection with the AIEAA, so they already have much more support. And then the idea is also to optimally support more of those bottom-up networks so that they can become more integrated and that they also can open up the AIEAA for new approaches and for new ideas. Because from an innovation perspective, diversity is important. If you just bet on one horse, you might bet on the wrong horse. So you should have a portfolio of approaches. So some ideas on dynamics of Linza and innovation. Well, like I said, they can develop from the outside, from outside pressures. For example, that consumers start to complain, then the farming community has to come up with an answer, but also sometimes they are unhappy about certain developments themselves. For example, that they get low prices, and then farmers and their networks might look for solutions. And they can be both more bottom-up, grassroots, but also more top-down, for example, steered from a farmers' organization. And both approaches are viable, and they can also strengthen each other. Ideally, you complement bottom-up action with some top-down support from formal policies to make these bottom-up networks stronger. But we also observed in the project that there's a big variety in terms of the types and way of innovation. All may lead to long-term change. Some of these grassroots niches can be very radical, and they can also create a lot of resistance. That might be good to shake up things, but in time, also through interaction with regime players, with established system, and they might find an in-between way which then enhances embedding of this innovation within, for example, the sector. And sometimes it also starts much more incremental. Both may lead to changes towards sustainability. And sometimes what is conceived radical at the local level in one Linza might have been done already several times in another country. So there it's more incremental change. But you should then not say, oh, this is not a radical innovation, or that this is not a relevant innovation. No, for that context, it is very relevant. And this also shows that the pace of innovation, and this also relates to the scenarios, we have a great diversity in the European Union, which should be taken into account. Very important also for Linza are ideas on boundary objects and boundary work. When you have multiple parties involved with their own ideas, there are boundaries in terms of language, in terms of incentives. You need to cross those boundaries. And what can be very helpful in crossing those boundaries is having a facilitator, a broker, who can make those translations. And it's very important for Linza, so for networks, but also boundary objects. And for example, what Krijn presented, scenarios can be a boundary object. What is a boundary object? It is something which allows for different interpretations from different groups, but still breeds some sense of commonality. So it's a vehicle for discussion and getting convergence. And so we identified in this project that is very important, and that's also a role for science, and that can also be a role of the EU support program, help in creating boundary objects. Having science in the form of designs, visualizations, scenarios as a tool to bring stakeholders together, and also to check assumptions. The first speaker also talked about it, how scientifically grounded is all this thinking around sustainability. Well, from this project, there were some recommendations for advisory services. Well, it needs to acknowledge the diversity, so shift away from a science push approach in which they try to impose one solution. I don't think that happens a lot anymore in the EU, but really become a fosterer of co-learning. So also reskill to be able to fulfill the facilitator role. And in some countries, this is already much more common than in other countries. For research, participatory research can assist Linza in developing their potential. This doesn't mean that you have to do participatory research from the start on with all these networks, but you do have to see how can you link research effectively into these networks. And sometimes they're basically looking for some scientific evidence to support their claims. Well, if you have that on the shelf, then you can bring it in, but then you need to also be able to identify what is needed, where is it, and what is the right moment. And this sometimes also requires skills of researchers, that they're open to these Linza, that they come out of their ivory tower. And in some countries, there are disincentives towards that, because their scientists are encouraged to remain in their ivory tower because their main output should be peer-reviewed articles. Well, then I rather would sit in my office than going out to talk to farmers if I would be held accountable for that. Some recommendations for policy: you need to support social learning. And so beyond technical support, also provide this process support. Well, I think the EIP is doing that, and these operational groups. And also support Linza to foster institutional innovation. So if you have these grassroots groups, these radical niches, they can also be kind of a crowbar to open up a knowledge system which is not open to new insights. And for example, which is kind of resisting changes which are just coming, and you need to incorporate them. And then these radical networks which are already working with new developments can help open up such systems. And at the bottom I put a term which has been coined by a guy named Bully Elzen. He's a system innovation thinker, a transition thinker. And he says, What is really important is to do dual track governance. So really combine the track of stimulating grassroots with more top-down policies to combine the best of both worlds. If you want to have more information on this, there's a special issue in JEE reporting on the project, and there has also been a paper in Euro Choices. And I think if you Google a bit, you can get those free of charge in some social network site. Okay, next example, PURE, also a European project. Not a project aimed at creating LINSA, big multi-stakeholder networks, more at focused at sustainable pest management, doing participatory research basically at the farm level. So this is about an interface between farmers, researchers and advisors. So not the whole AIEAA involved, not all these players from value chains involved. Why is this a relevant project for this presentation? How does it relate to policy? It relates to policy because this takes place into a setting in which you see programs like Horizon 2020, in which big programs with similar work packages are implemented in different European countries. You also see that worldwide there are big programs which are using similar approaches. But the idea is the importance of looking kind of in a comparative way at how does this work, this participatory work, result in all these different countries is important, because there might not be the same room for doing this type of work in all these countries. The institutional settings may differ. And institutional context is the rules and norms which govern the behavior. So in this project, we looked at how does the PURE approach of participatory research, intensive collaboration between farmers and scientists and advisors to create new solutions for pest management, how does it work out? And these institutions, they influence professional identities, what is good science. They influence organizational disincentives for participatory research or incentives. And also the country culture influences the way you can do participatory research. Different countries in Europe have different ways of collaborating, of communicating. If you, for example, would want to do participatory research in India, you would need to take into account the caste system, because there a researcher might come from a higher caste that doesn't want to speak with the farmer who's from a lower caste. That influences how you can do this type of research. And so in this project, we look at several dimensions. We looked at the personal dimension, what are the professional identities, the roles and routines of researchers, how is the team composition, are there some people who have already some experience with this work who can help others. We look at how does the organization stimulate it, what is the early experience with this type of project. We also look at how does a work package stimulate this. We're talking here about the European project with a similar approach being implemented in several countries. How does the country AIEAA stimulate this? And obviously the country AIEAA also influences at the personal dimension, the organizational dimension. So we looked at all kinds of factors in PURE. And so we compared France, Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark. How did they implement this work package on co-innovation, on joint work for innovation? And so I'll just give some examples. This is very anecdotal evidence. Just to illustrate how it influences. So for example, in France and in Germany, in this project, this was really a new thing for the researchers. They didn't have any experience with it. It really changed their routines. In the Netherlands and Denmark, it was already much more common, so there it worked much more easily. If you look at the pilot team, the German team was really about ivory tower type scientists. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you want to do participatory research, it can be an obstacle. Whereas in France, there were also advisors involved who are much closer to practice, so that also made the work for the scientists easier. And so there, the composition of the team enhanced participatory research with farmers. If you look at the organizational dimension, here a quote of a French researcher, he says, yeah, well, the way INRA's structured incentives we are given, it's not easy to work in an interdisciplinary or maybe transdisciplinary way. And so that also really conditions the space for this type of work. And in Denmark, this was, for example, much more easy. If you look at the experience the different groups had, in some countries, for example, in Denmark, they built on a long tradition working with the same farmers. And so they already had confidence, trust, working procedures, whereas in the Netherlands, they couldn't just identify a group, they had to look for a new group, start with a new group, so then you have to start really from scratch. Whereas these projects, more or less, have their similar deadlines, their similar milestones, so this also influences what you can really achieve. If you look at the project context, this is a quote from a German researcher, he did acknowledge that there was space for learning within the broader project, so the different country teams coming together, and that was really helpful for them having less experience, really getting up to speed with this participatory type of work. Then an example of the country AIEAA. Here's a quote of a German researcher. He says, we have very separate roles. You're a researcher, then you do research. If you're an advisor, you do advisory work. Our goal is just to give the input to the advisors. They pass it to the farmers. They were not used in their role division of more participatory, collaborative working. In other countries, this was much more common, like the Netherlands. And then country norms. Obviously, this also differs from person to person, but here a quote from a German researcher who also talked about the way of collaborating, that it was different in the countries, which also influences the way you can do collaborative research. So the conclusion of this is that institutional context, histories, and path dependencies lead to differing starting points for similar work packages. This is very relevant in the context of European projects and policies. These projects can create a learning environment, but that also space should be given for that. There's a key risk in just exporting or transplanting the participatory methodology from one place to the other. And that is what sometimes happens in the European projects. One partner writes this work package and then it should apply to all the countries. So there's a need for more awareness in these types of international program designs as regards to different starting conditions and institutional context. That was my part of the presentation. I kept the best for last. Obviously, it's much nicer to see Valentina, so I give the floor to her.
Well, thank you, Lawrence, and thank you all. I just would take a few minutes because what I would like to stress is something that has been already told somehow by Green Pop, and this demonstrates how we have been working together on the same topics. Anyway, there are some few keywords that I wanted to underline in these concluding remarks about this presentation, that are participation, that is co-creation, co-innovation, something that means that now the address that also the European policy is giving to all the talks that we have given is create together, so participate together. And in this scene, of course, innovation has to be seen as a learning process, as something that is created just participating all together. So it's different than the accent that has been given now to the policies. Innovation is seen as a learning process. Interactions between different actors now involved in networks, so networks where all the actors co-participate, generate learning, and by this is creating innovation. The example of LINSA, so the project that has been already presented, means and makes more explicit how learning interactive networks focused on specific topics serve the general aims of what has been called the European Innovation Partnership on agricultural productivity and sustainability. I just put some few words to explain a bit what is this concept, that Brian already told something about that. So all those activities, all those projects that have been already presented now fulfill the need and the aim of the EIP Agri. That is the new instrument that has been created to facilitate the information flow between research and practice, and to promote a faster and wider transposition of innovative solutions into practice. Those are words that have been taken up from the document from the European Commission. So this is just to stress and underline how these projects fulfill the needs to create or to bridge the gap, most of all, that is between research and practice. So between what is science and what is farmer, what is practice, is farmers, what is the need from the local background, from the local activities, what is the need for research and for innovation. The EIP Agri is funded under the CAP Rural Development Program and under the research funds, so Horizon 2020, and is based on this interactive innovation model. So we are going towards something that is more interaction and not linear model as we saw before. And the operational groups are the main body through which this concept has been put into practice, because those operational groups collect together and put together different actors that comes from different areas, so extension services, research, and practice, just working together to overcome those that are the bottlenecks that have been also underlined in the AIEAA studies, in the Forest Sites report, that are the weaknesses in the insufficient information flow, and also the missing links between the different actors at the AIEAA. So those activities, those projects, those links between them are trying and have the aim to create and co-create innovation and knowledge together. On the other side, the EIP has funds or received support from the Horizon 2020, so the research and innovation policy, that offers the base for research projects, including on-farm experiment, pilot activities, demonstration actions, and of course, the interaction is the key word also in this project, because we can see this cross-fertilization between the rural development program and research policy. The aim, for example, through the Horizon 2020 program is that of creating learning and thematic networks and multi-actor projects that are two different instruments that can be used to fulfill this need of knowledge flowing and information flowing between all the actors, so that research is informed about what are the needs of farmers, and farmers are informed about what research is doing. However, of course, unless we have been talking about all those European activities and general governance problems and general idea, what has to be stressed is still the local aspect. So how the AIEAAs differ from each other and how the actors involved in different countries differ in terms of support and incentives. Well, this is just a few points that I wanted to put on the table, but of course the discussion might be even longer, so this can open a debate also for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Lauren. Well, let's move now to the Italian regional experience with the policies for innovation. The next speaker, the next speaker is Anya Vagnozzi. She is a researcher in the National Institute of Agriculture Economics, which now is changing the acronym AIEAA, but probably is not the last version for the future. Well, you have the floor, Anna. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizer for the invite. And I'm speaking about policies for innovation in the new rural development programs. My contribution is more applied because I speak the Italian regional experience. The rural development policy for the period 2014-2020 gives an important role to the knowledge system and the innovation diffusion. It is one of the two financial instruments with which the European has realized the objective of Europe 2020 to promote the knowledge and the innovation. The other is the framework program Horizon 2020. This presentation is going to try to understand if the Europe 2020 side and foresight objectives had an effective implementation into the planning and rules of rural development regulation, and if in Italy there are some ongoing problems. The presentation is organized in 4 sections. The main novelties of the rural policy on knowledge and innovation using a holistic approach, the set of Italian problems that this allows to take on, the importance that Italian regions have given to this intervention and related funding, and the first difficulties which came to light during the relationship with the European Commission services for the rural development program's approval, and the critical points of the present European approach and some solution proposals. So, the main novelties of the rural development policy. In the rural development phase 2014-2020, the innovation diffusion and the knowledge growth are the first priority of the Regulation 13.5/2013. And especially is a cross priority because it is considered to be a support for the other 5 priorities and almost all measures of intervention. As you know, the measures is the name, the denomination of the single intervention expected by the regulation. This is a new approach compared to the planning period 2007-2013, when the agricultural knowledge system was promoted with some specific actions, often not connected each other. I'm speaking about the measure 111, 114, and 124. In addition, the intervention subjects were delimited into few topics concerning the cross-compliance and the job security. The innovation was the content only of the measure 124, and the focus was on the partnership and cooperation rather than the innovation effect for the farms. So the new aspect, the Italian regions, together with the other European member states, stressed this question during the last planning period, underlying the importance of the knowledge and innovation to implement many other actions, from the farm investment to the reduction of the environmental impact. The main novelties are the innovation diffusion and the knowledge growth are the first priority. The knowledge transfer and the innovation diffusion concern a wide file of topics. The target is more expanded because included the farms, but also forest holders and small and medium enterprises. Moreover, the subject involved can be single or associated. And the whole intervention is composed by complementary and interrelated actions. Information and training, Article 14, Measure 1. Advisory services, Article 15, Measure 2. Partnership for innovation, Article 35, Measure 16. The other significant change concern the theoretical basics and the methodology. We heard in the other presentations. The main topics are the same importance of tacit and scientific knowledge for the human capital development, the better result for the innovation diffusion when all the innovation chain players are involved, farmers, researchers, advisories, and the usefulness of the interactive approach to define farmers' problems and to define some innovation solution. The new approach is interesting also for the specific characteristics that are required from training, information, and advisory actions. Indeed, the instruments that can be used are various, from the traditional courses to activities demonstration, from information action to the farm and forest exchange scams and visits. The documents of European Commission services that supported the editing of rural development programs specify even the difference between the information and the advisory. The first is a general support, and the second is a tailor-made support for the farms. In the last years, these topics are never had so much interest. The intervention that stimulated the most The intervention that stimulated the most interest both public institution and private subject is the European Innovation Partnership for Agricultural Productivity and Sustainability. We heard in the other presentation that is concerned the funding of operational groups that are composed by several players of the innovation chain, and the creation for programs to promote the innovation diffusion and the link between research and farms in reference to the topic mentioned above. The European Union and the Member States supported the operational group with the EP European Network and the National Rural Network. The aim of these networks is to facilitate the exchange of expertise and good practice and to establish a dialogue between farmers and the research community. Now, the Italian regional situation. In Italy, the situation and competencies for the agricultural development services are regional. So the regions public laws and programs and provide funding for the information, training, advisory, technical support, demonstration activity. The research is a topic that concerns both state and regions. So they can provide for programs and funding. Usually the state publishes the framework rules, laws, and finances basic research. The regions publish regional programs and finance applied research. Therefore, the innovation diffusion is jurisdiction of both. But whereas the regions are responsible for the rural development programs, they are planning the innovation action expected by the regulation 13.5/2013. The chance offered to Italian agriculture to give a push to the innovation diffusion and consequently to the productivity and sustainability growth is very important because the wide part of farms has an adequate profitability and still haven't solved some old technical and management problems. This situation emerged from the data analysis of the farm accounting and from some activities to verify the innovation farm needs that the Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Forest Policy and the regions organized during the preparatory phase of rural development programs. For example, as you can see from the figures, the five different condition is clear. One of the economic and profitability farm index, the agricultural land productivity, change with the farm's economic dimension, also substantially. Considering the Italian situation, the farms that are in large or medium-large economic dimension have the index higher than the farms that are in medium and medium-small economic dimension. Considering one of regional situation, Marche region, the farms that are in medium-small and large economic dimension have the index higher than the other economic dimension. If the innovation has an effect on the productivity, a part of these figures can depend on the different innovation state of these farms. I know that this information is not enough. It would be useful to have more detailed data. But this data permits us to say that innovation farm need change, especially when we consider the economic result and the different rural territories. Therefore, it's important to play innovation diffusion, evaluating the specific needs and problems. In summary, all innovations are not positive for everyone. More detailed information emerging from the direct debates that the ministry and regions are organizing with exponents of farm trade unions, producer associations, cooperative companies, and with the complex Italian research system. Only for example, some of the problems and needs underlying with the productive sector are the improvement of the fresh quality, the fruit quality, and the counter-action to the consumption decrease, the structural difficulties of olive growing to innovate and increase productivity, and so on. I want to underline that the problem and needs already indicated are not very new. And they are the indicator that in these years, the innovation have been introduced only by excellent farms, while the average farms have had many difficulties to innovate. Another question for regional agricultural knowledge systems is the progressive fragmentation. It's caused by the high number of subjects and structures that work for agricultural knowledge system with various objectives and tasks, often similar, but with a lacking coordination. It would be important to improve the AIEAA governance using the traditional public instrument like framework programs, coordination tables, and increasing the interdisciplinary project and network. During the debates, the Producer Association underlined two other AIEAA lacks: the serious degree of advisory personnel and the innovation supply that doesn't always comply to farms' needs. If the Italian situation is that presented now, it's easy to imagine that the importance that have the funding of rural development policy to improve the Italian AKS and to promote a detailed innovation diffusion. In this phase, the European Commission approved 4 regional rural development programs out of 21, and one of the 2 national programs, the National Rural Development Network Program. Therefore, the consultation between the European Commission services and the majority regional services are underway. However, the Rural Development Program drafts are available and we can verify the funds that the regions decided to plan in the first phase. As we can see, the total amount funding for innovation initiatives is around 850 million euros. That is equal to 4.5% of the total rural development program public expenditure. There is a large variance among the regions. The percentage can range from the 14% of Molise and the 8.9% of Piedmont to the 1.5% of Sicily and the 1.3% of Sardinia and so on. The measure with the highest amount of fund is that relating to the advisory, measure 2. Then there is the measure relating to the training and information, measure 1. At last, the measure that finances the operational group of AP and the operation actions for development of new products, practices, processing as technology. At this moment, it's not easy to understand some regional choices relating to the different amount of public expenditure for innovation and knowledge because the programs aren't closed. But we can underline that the choices have been influenced by administrative and financial questions. For example, the measure 16.1 relative to cooperation for AP operational groups has a few resources compared with the other measures, probably because many regions decide to finance the operational groups using this measure to cover only the coordination organization costs, and other rural development measures to cover the costs which arise more directly from the activities of the project. Measure 1 for information, measure 2 for advisory, measure 4 for investment, and so on. There is another possibility to finance the operational groups, to cover all costs through the cooperation measures, including those costs which fit under other measures. The Commission services offer these change to reduce the possible administrative burden of using several measures together. But the Italian regions opted for the first procedures, essentially for 2 reasons. They aren't sure that the operational groups will succeed, and don't risk to not spend the funds. And the institutional controls on measure 16.1, if it contains all the direct costs, are more complex. However, this choice could be conflict with the significance of the operational groups, that should be the place in which all innovation plays work together. If the operational group's project is financed by different measures, it's easier that each subject works alone. Moreover, the management of an intervention using plus measures is more complex because it isn't to start various procedures together, and the time to close the practices are longer. This isn't a place to examine in depth this problem, but this is an example of when the administrative rules and procedures can create some obstacle of the aim of the policy action. An important task of a public institution at all levels is to take on these difficulties and find some solution. In summary, this is a typical governance problem. Comparing the total expenditure in the period of 2014-2020 with the period of the 2007-2013, the actual amount has almost doubled. It's a signal that the Italian regions want to invest in the knowledge and innovation, and so it's necessary that the actions have a simple and flowing itinerary, and the beneficiaries have a clear knowledge of aims, rules, and funding possibility. Another example. Another possible problem could arise with the measure that support the use of advisory, measure 2, because for the first time, the Commission services decided to adopt the public procurement law rules. This choice modified traditional procedures to finance the advisory body, and especially it wouldn't permit the selection of the trust advisory by the farmer. In the phase 2007-2013, the advisors participated to a call, and if they had the specific requirements, they were inserted in the accreditation list, where the farmer could choose and then could request a refund of their cost. In this period, the farmers can be the direct beneficiaries of funding. The beneficiaries will be the advisory bodies, and that will be chosen with the rules, public procurement law. Also in this case, it will be important to study procedures that don't discourage the use of the advisory. So, conclusion. Promoting knowledge growth and innovation diffusion with public intervention is a complex job because there are too many subjects, many issues, highly important of methods and instruments. If you make some mistakes in this area, may fail the entire intervention. And then there are different kinds of needs and different kinds of targets. In my opinion, it isn't a new idea, but the only solution to achieve this result is to organize a strong governance structure with the collaboration of the different institutional levels. For regionalized states like Italy, there are 3 levels, or perhaps 4 with local level. It is necessary because the keywords are needs, tailor-made innovations, expert services, interactive approach, coordination, link, network. The rural development policy offers many instruments. The official networks, European AP networks and National Rural Network, and fund to create new local network. The technical assistance measures for each rural development program, and the necessary ex-ante administrative condition that each institution had to demonstrate to have. One of these is the existence of a public framework documents like research program or services program, and the public and private structure to implement what has been planned. The lack of this governance commitment could undermine the general policy aims and the effectiveness of the intervention. The public expenditure will be also high and will be create many teeny initiatives of innovation, but it couldn't achieve the real innovative change of the agricultural productive base. It couldn't achieve the critical mass to make a breakthrough of the agricultural Italian sector. In Italy, the condition is positive because the region, the region are just organized in interregional networks specialized on research and innovation services. The ministry promoted the editing of an important strategic plan on the innovation research that has been recently published. The National Rural Network provides animation and support activities for AP operational groups and the other innovation actions. Now, the responsible institution should start a coordinated action to achieve some common objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Well, one key argument of all the presentation has been the importance of the interaction between producers and users of innovation. It's for this reason that we're discussing with Roberto Esposti the program of this conference. We thought that Matteo Bartolini, who is the president of the Council of Young Farmers in Europe, the European Council of Young Farmers, could be the right person to give his view on this issue. SEJA represents 31 organizations across 24, if I remember well, countries, member states in Europe. Thank you, Matteo, for being here.
Well, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer for inviting me to participate in this important moment discussion concerning the innovation in the agricultural sector. I mean, let me say that for us as a young farmers, it's much more easy to think about to innovate and to reshape the agricultural sector when we set up a farm. Even because a person like me, for example, that I'm not from a family of farmers, I set up a farm, start from nothing. So for me, it's very easy to take a decision in the innovative way. It's a bit less easy for my colleagues who has already a farmer and who has already a dad or a grandfather who try to explain what is the best way to produce and to maintain the farm and the activity and into the market. But I would like also to thank you because personally, I do believe that we can reshape the agricultural sector only if we talk and we talk each other and we know each other what you can suggest to us and what are our needs. If we can create like the presentation that was explained very well before concerning the EIP, the operational group approach, I think we can try to find the best way to find a solution for the future of the agricultural sector in the EU. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm a farmer. As I said, I'm Italian. I live in Umbria, and I cultivate truffle in Umbria in an innovative way, and later on maybe I will explain much better what that means for me. SEJA is an umbrella, EU umbrella organization who represents around 2 million of young farmers across Europe with 31 members from 24 EU member states. the aim of CESIA is to provide a single voice for all European young farmers to the EU institution in order to shape the agricultural policy framework by forging direct links between policymakers and young farmers, as well as providing a platform for information, education, and exchange between young farmers. CESIA reaches out to those young farmers on ground across European rural and remote areas in order to promote and facilitate the civic engagement of those who need representation at EU level. Young farmers, in particular, for the data that you already maybe knows, need representation at EU level because they require policy measures to address the specific difficulties surrounding entry to the agricultural sector, such as lack of access to land, credit, high investment with a low return in the first year of businesses, and the legal and financial difficulties of farm succession. With the aim of obtaining increased policy tools to tackle these challenges and to increase young farmers' numbers within the European population, CESIA provides 2 million young people from across the Union with one unified voice. But let me inform you that at EU level, the young entrepreneurs under 35 years old are only 7% concerning the more than 1/3 over 65 years old. So that's that I mean have to be discussed at EU level and try to find, even with the innovation, the best way to have in the future much more percentage of young farmer into the agricultural sector. This is also the reason why later on I will try to say what does mean for me innovation. That is not only IT, but a network and a platform like CESIA is essential in order to promote civic engagement among EU agricultural youth, particularly to help young people overcome the financial constraints that may stand in the way of the civic engagement, just as they stand in the way of setting up a farm. As you know, food demand is projected to escalate by up to 50% by 2030, and this is due to a number of factors. First of all, most importantly, an ever-growing world population expected to hit 10 billion by 2015, and including an increasing growing middle class in country with substantial population as India and China. And this middle class growth will put even more pressure on our global primary resources as demand for meat and dairy products rocket. This is the intensive sustainability that maybe we have to think about it. At the same time, pressures are also escalating on the environmental on the environment, as we can see depicted by the climate change and other developments. This means we must start producing more food from fewer resources. With this in mind, EU agricultural policy must focus on increasing employment opportunities in the sector by facilitating entry to it and promoting innovation and additional vocational education and training geared toward more efficient and productive agriculture. It is clear what I said, that young farmers should be the target for all these elements. From Eurostat, European young farmers have been proven to be more productive, more innovative, and more sustainable than their older counterparts. This means that they can produce more food from the same amount of resources, which epitomizes the challenges which farmers will have to overcome in the future. Young farmers tend to have more efficient farm and employ more labor. They are good for the rural economy, in turn with the innovative farming techniques and modern technology, as well as a good business practices, marketing, multifunctional and much more, and so on. All this is likely to be down to their academic qualification, as well as their determination and enthusiasm. Young farmers have made it clear that they can make a difference to the future of farming. We just have to help them to get into a position where they are able to. SEJA was particularly approving the new European Innovation Partnership for the agricultural productivity and sustainability introduced by the CAP. Like it was explained before, EIP focused exclusively on innovation within the sector by forming operational group of both academics and farmers in a bid to encourage cooperation for a more productive and sustainable sector for the benefit of all. The EIP aims to foster a competitive and sustainable agricultural sector which achieves more from less. SEJA has high hopes and expectation of the EIP Agri. This is particularly considering its implementation bring together a number of different funding streams in order to achieve one object, the agricultural innovation. Innovation is a key driver for change and the way to turn challenges into opportunities and concrete improvements on the ground. Agriculture is a sector which holds many opportunities for growth, yet also often relies heavily on age-old techniques, notably because of the age imbalance in the farming population. For this reason, it is crucial that young farmers are targeted directly by the EIP, as they are the most likely to take the advantage of the innovation opportunity offered by partnership. In this moment, I would like also to say just a few words that we were one of the first European organizations who immediately had a good reaction on the EIP program. But I have to say that in the last focus group that was open, it seems that the Commission has started to change their volunteer on the young farmers, because they create a new operational group. We started to talk with the Commission concerning the young farmers and how we can have much more young farmers into the agricultural sector. But the focus group changed the name, and not anymore in the young farmers, but in the new entrants. Maybe this is also for the economical problem situation at EU level, but for me, new entrants doesn't mean that are young. And I don't know how much is good to focus and to put some resources and in investment for a short term. I would like to strongly recommend that maybe the young farmers could, as I said before, from the Eurostat data, they could bring some employment who can help them in the farm. They can create a collaboration between senior and younger, but put some European funds on the new entrants. Personally, I don't think it will be a good opportunity for growth and for job, maybe for job, but not for growth for the agricultural sector, to innovate the agricultural sector. This is something that I would like also to say that SEJA has been involved in the EIP since its conception, and we had participating in the elaboration of its strategic agenda. I was in charge as a SEJA president on the high-level steering committee who create all the guidelines for the EIP and for the research Horizon 2020. Now I'm involved as an expert in the focus group on innovative short food supply management, and we are working closely with the EIP team in order to get more young farmers involved in the focus group, which will be set up in the future. Now we are waiting for the national implementation of the operational group. Of course, the EU member states and region have a crucial role to play supporting in the operational group. The rural development regulation offers a catalog of measures intended to help member states and regional authorities set up their 2014-2020 rural development programs. So we need to be prepared on our rural development program in order to propose an effective project for establishment of an operational group. But another thing that I would like to share with you is also the information that I put on the meeting, on the last meeting on the high-level steering board committee, where I said that it is useful to create a European network where if there are operational groups who want to focus on beef or other things, they first of all have to understand if there are any others who already had the same research. Otherwise, we cannot think about the northern part of Italy who are studying and researching something that is the same on the Austrian part that they did. So this is a waste money, and we should try to work in the best way and to be much more sustainable also in this, and to be much more innovative. This is also the reason why personally I like very much to see that in Italy at national level they create guidelines, but what I am a bit surprised is that the research is at the end every region can decide by their own what they want to spend, what they want to put. I don't think this is a way to work together in a way to have a better agricultural sector at national level. I would also like to underline that research in university or laboratories must pass through the testing on the farms. Otherwise, it remains a research for its own sake that I will never bring concrete benefit to the sector. We need to change the traditional view of innovation in agriculture, in which agricultural research creates technologies that are transferred to agricultural producers for subsequent adoption. In this view, the needs, experience, and knowledge of the end user of innovation are not taken into consideration. This perspective, it is no longer capable of addressing the current challenges of the agricultural sector. It is necessary a non-linear approach to innovation, but a bottom-up approach with farmers included as relevant sources of knowledge. In this multi-actor model of innovation, knowledge is no longer transferred linearly from a scientist to farmer, but is created together in a process of knowledge sharing and co-production. For this reason, in a bid to exchange ideas and best practices for a more innovative and sustainable agricultural sector, the EIP could grow into an important and useful tool. Agriculture without research and innovation, it is no longer able to meet the criteria of environmental sustainability and economic needs. Finally, the innovation, it is not only linked to the products or the productive methods. We need to reshape the agricultural sector and our way to develop our business. This is what, as a young farmers, we are thinking. Innovation needs to be adopted also in the management of at our farms, in selling of our production, in the communication tools, and in the relationship with the consumers. We need to develop new distribution channels using internet and by shortening the distance between producer and consumer. I'm not talking the short food supply chain, and I mean local, not only local, but also to link the producer into the consumer. For just an example, I sell my product directly to Miami, but this is not short in a certain way, but the buyer in Miami, they know me, they see my face, and when they buy something, they know that it came from a farmer directly. So this is what I have in my mind, what I think is good to do. Another tool that need to be implemented is the farm business network, a way that can help our family farm to survive in a more challenging and competitive economic context, maintaining at the same time their autonomy and identity. Innovative and a big barrier for young farmers. As I said before, concerning the access to land and credit, there are in Europe some best practices that we can support in order to find innovative ways that can solve the two biggest obstacles faced by young farmers when they try to enter into the sector. And also, because we had last week, 10 days ago, we had a discussion in Brussels concerning the fertility of soil and concerning the food waste. And we invited some experts and also from the GMV. And what they said is that mainly who can take care about the soil is the owner of the soil. So for this reason, the new generation need to have a bit more than normal rental contract if we want to preserve the soil and the fertility of the soil. Talking about some way who can be helpful for the young farmers. In France, there are two important tools that could help the young farmers. One is the SAFER, and the other one is Terre de Liens. SAFER is a no-profit company with a mission of general interest under supervision of the Ministry of Agriculture and Finance. Today, there are 26 SAFER that cover the French territory, and SAFER have now over 50 years of experience in the field. One of the key actions of SAFER is to encourage young farmers to have access to land by buying and selling the land. In selling the land, the priority is given to young farmers. And Terre de Liens is a social economy enterprise that buys farm to reduce the loss of agricultural land in the difficulties of access to agricultural land. These land are then leased to farmers starting their activities. And this is something that is really important. To acquire these farms, Terre de Liens create tools or so-called foncière. The foncière capital consists of saving of citizens who have chosen to invest in community projects, a sort of crowdfunding initiative. And personally, I think these or other projects, in order to understand how we can reduce the lack of access to land, have to be started at EU level to create an initiative in order to understand how we can also avoid the land grabbing. Because I was talking last September in front of the Ministry of Agriculture for the European Informal Council of Ministry of Agriculture. And I will explain to them that last year in April, in 2014, yes, there was a Chinese investment fund who arrived in France, and they bought something like 30,000 hectares of land. I mean, in the first approach, it doesn't mean that we have to be scared about this because we are in a free market. But the problem is that from January 2015, they are trying to use this 30,000 hectares of land just to producing milk powder for the Chinese market. That means that if we want to talk about land and say that we have to leave the market to regulate everything, maybe with the cost of the land, with the problem and the lack of access to credit for the young generation, for the new generation, maybe only just the big investors, the big funds can buy a land in EU. And we can have a big problem in 2013 or 2015, because maybe we have no land for our production, or we have not enough land, like is already not enough land for our production. So young farmers have the responsibility of feeding the world of tomorrow. However, they will not be able to do this unless they are supported in their endeavors to innovate their techniques, whether this be with information, education, advice, or financial investment and assistance. Young farmers are ready to meet the challenge of feeding a growing population with dwindling resources, but they must be supported in their effort, as it is already difficult enough to enter the sector and stay afloat in it, let alone while preserving natural resources at the same time. It is therefore imperative that interlinkage are formed at policy level to mirror the ones we find in nature, links between food, water, energy, climate, and more. All-encompassing challenges demand all-encompassing solution. And that means information and education for both consumer and farmers about water use and food waste and food water waste, support for younger educated people to get themselves established in the EU agricultural sector, and financial support for investment into sustainable technologies and techniques. Concerning my experience, as I was saying before, as a farmer, a few years ago on my farm in Umbria, I worked with the researcher with the University of Perugia to develop a new way to cultivate truffle. And together we set up technology on my land which could analyze the soil data. This is something good for the environment. This is sustainable for the economic way, and maybe in the future, if everything go well, also for the social way. Because together we set up this kind of sensor on the soil, and this analysis would include detail on water content, nutrients level in the soil, and so on, up to 5 times an hour. This information will then guide me in terms of irrigation of the land and other inputs. This is not only help to bring down the amount of resources used, but also reduce the time it had previously taken to grow truffle, because normally you have to wait from 6 to 10 years, and in this way we are trying to get and to arrive with after 6 years to have a good production of truffle. And this contributed to a successful truffle farm and agritourism establishment with the future of as a truffle school. So put together multifunctionality as a truffle production, didactical activities, and also hospitality. And all together, I think this can give much more effort to me and to my family and into my farm, even because otherwise it's quite difficult to live up into the hill where I am, where there are many wild animals and many problems for my production. So what I can say, I hope that EIP will encourage this kind of fruitful cooperation between different innovation actors, and that others like me will be able to experience the benefit which come from such important partnership. once again, I would like to thank you, all of you, for listening to me and for the organizer for inviting me to participate in this debate. And I look forward to discussing for this issue for the future. Thank you once again.
Well, it's 1:15 p.m. We have time 15 minutes for a short discussion. Ornella Maietta first. Well, wait.
Thank you. I'm Ornella Maietta from the University of Naples. I found all the papers very interesting, and I find that the common words on which I want to pay your attention is the absence of a common language that Alan said. We do not share the same language with the farmers, with the producer community. And I feel that it is important to understand why this happened and what we can do to shorten this distance. I have, of course, some idea about, and I will say that we had not the proper incentive. I mean, both farmers, both scholars, to communicate to each other. Because agriculture policy has never been an environmental policy. In fact, you said that the FADN network does not collect information about environmental indicators. And also because agricultural policy has never been a research policy. In fact, the members of the European Union does not share a common structure for the innovation, the knowledge and innovation system, as Pope has shown us. And so one is, I mean, the first probably answer is that we had not the proper incentive, and also that farmers probably used less knowledge. I mean, the technique were less intensive in use of knowledge, so they did not need to share common knowledge with actors producing knowledge. And it's important that this distance is shortened, but we have not good knowledge instrument to understand how to do. For example, we don't know how this absence of a common language depends on the structure of the knowledge system, in the sense that we have seen a lot of different systems, but we don't know which is the impact on the absence of this distance, how to shorten. For example, we don't know anything about how teaching is important for knowledge spillover. And for example, Italian system compared to the French one is based on knowledge. And of course, we can think that the teaching and education is very important for knowledge spillover, particularly for smaller farms. So this is very important, I guess. And it's what we have to work on, I think in the future. And there is also a problem, I guess, of a cultural, national culture that is different between systems. So some systems collaborate more than others. But I think that the main problem is that both farmers, both scholars have not proper incentive to collaborate. And finally, there is also a problem that Bartolini has shown us that, of course, large farms with young farmers have no problem of communicate with those producing innovation. They know they are innovative, they know how to produce and how to collect. So there is a problem that is related to the region, if marginal or not, and also to the human capital of farmers. Even if the new indication, as Anna has shown us, is to shorten, the new indication of the policy is how to decrease, is to concentrate. It gives incentive to use the knowledge produced by all the system to decrease this and to speak the same language in order to co-innovate, I guess.
Rob.
Good morning, I'm Benedetto Rocchi from the University of Florence. A few words on the interesting presentation of Professor Backwell's, you started saying that we do agree that often agriculture is environmentally damaging. And it is true, but my question is at which level, at which spatial scale? I think that I want to start with a short example. During a research project in Tuscany, we tried to measure the greenhouse gases emissions necessary to produce and deliver to consumers 1 liter of fresh milk. And the results showed that they were higher in the case of Tuscan organic milk than in the case of extra-region conventional imported milk. So, I think that there is a problem in measuring environmental impacts of a local agricultural activity at the global environmental level. And this is a problem not only because we have a higher uncertainty in measuring global effects at a local level, obviously, but also because I suppose that there may exist some trade-off between local negative impacts and global negative impacts, local and global impacts, at least in the short run. So some negative impacts are really clear and immediate at the local level. Some global impacts are less clear and we do not know exactly when they will happen. So, and this is a problem, and I suppose that also including the measurement of social impact of farming activity would further complicate the problem to solve. So I would like to listen something about this.
Any other questions before giving the floor to the speakers? So, Alan Backwell.
Thank you. You do ask tough questions. So I didn't catch your name, but the question at the front was, why are we still, or part of your question was, why are we still struggling with these language issues and what can we do about it? And in a way, the second comment illustrates the problem, that the difficulty with the language is that the problems we're dealing with are difficult, and some of them may not have solutions, the actions required to reduce certain kinds of environmental damage, greenhouse gas emissions, might well worsen some other aspects. So in the process of getting milk at the lowest emissions per litre implies a rather more intensive system which may have negative biodiversity effects or water pollution effects. But in a way, so in other words, the difficulty with the language is that farmers feel oppressed. They're struggling to make a living already in Europe, and despite very generous policy support from European citizens, which is hugely criticized outside Europe, despite that, economically, most farmers are struggling to make a living, and yet they hear this constant criticism. Not only are they struggling to make a living and they're getting this lavish support from the public, but also they're causing negative impacts on the environment. And not unnaturally, they feel defensive about this and they start by trying to deny it. Then they realize there's too much evidence to deny it. So they try to find other strategies. So it's difficult because the underlying issues are difficult, but that's the role of science and information. So for example, I mean, I absolutely accept the enormity of the conceptual problem, quite apart from the empirical problem, of balancing these environmental pressures at local, national, and global level. That you tackle a problem at one level and it creates another one at a different level. How do we grasp that? And in a sense, what that reflects is we don't understand those technical relationships sufficiently to know how to optimize and what is the right balance of actions. But let me come back to environmental limits. Which of the limits is likely to be reached soonest? And if it's I mean, it seems to me, my interpretation of the global argument about agriculture is there's seemingly a general acceptance that the climate imposed limits on agriculture, raising temperature, reducing precipitation, water availability, which will show up in specific locations and not everywhere, and not to the same extent. But if that's regarded as the higher level objective, but what it's important to know is what those limits look like in local areas if you want to change behavior of the local actors. And I just feel it's at that level we need to do more research at a finer level on these environmental thresholds than we currently do. I can only find literatures on environmental thresholds at the planetary level. Now, that's no use whatsoever to Matteo to know some planetary limit. What am I supposed to do on my little farm in Italy? I've got no idea. So that's the knowledge intensification that I'm trying to signal. But I don't know the answers to your questions. My suspicion is that temperature increase, water shortage on agricultural production are likely to be more imposing constraints locally than biodiversity loss or landscape quality loss. Now, society may not like the implications of that conclusion, but if food security is a #1 priority, and I would have thought it more or less has to be, then there's a cost to be paid. Internalizing externalities was never going to be easy, and it isn't. But Crine will no doubt say something about the structure of knowledge systems, which was asked about.
Well, I think in addition to this point, perhaps, because that links to your comments, if you take, I'm getting older, I turn 60 in a few months. If you take the long view, then we come from a system which tried to uniform things. Take the common agriculture policy. I mean, there was a committee coming in Brussels every week and setting a cereal price or saying, well, so, and I think also in science, I think that because, for instance, we lacked a lot of the data which Ellen was talking about, we tend to come up with uniform answers that we think are good for everybody. And that's not so much a critic to the past, that is the circumstances where we had to work. If you now look to these effects of, for instance, climate change, water shortage, the fact that we have educated farmers over the last 40 years to a much higher level in Europe than 40 years ago. Fortunately, a lot of people who now enter farming have, for instance, a BA. Asks, I think, for systems where you put more trust or where you even more depend on the local knowledge to see if you have to do something with smart irrigation or with agroforestry in that region, or what is the purpose of doing agriculture in that region. And in that sense, I'm very much a European, so I think we should build European systems. People want to be linked to each other, but it's a little bit of a philosophical answer, but I realize, but that the solutions are, I think, to be found locally or regionally, and that fits into the graph that Laurens was showing on these niches, and we are going through a period of transition, so to say, and new technologies coming in, there are new big challenges on a global level, but certainly also in Europe, and then you have to dare to experiment. And even in science, I think we can't say this will be the right technical pathway or the other one will. The only trust that I have is in bringing people together in their local circumstance, link them to other experiences elsewhere in Europe or in the world, and see if they can come up with a solution. And then I think the markets or society will select those things that will fly and those that don't.
Yes, just adding to Krein's comment, it's an interesting thought, creating a European agricultural knowledge and innovation system. Like I showed in my presentation, or tried to show how we have a lot of diversity, which sometimes makes it difficult to apply more, well, I wouldn't say uniform approaches, but approaches which maybe have been working well in one context, but it doesn't mean that they will work well in another context. I think in terms of innovation system structure, we are also having niches now with the EIP, maybe with some of these programs, experimenting, and selection and competition, like Krein said, will show what can be captured on more European level and what really needs to remain regional. I think with big data and those kinds of things, and also with Facebook, you will get European sharing networks. It's actually already happening. There are people, farmers from New Zealand, who detect a cow health issue, they put it on Facebook, and they get an answer or some tips and tricks from a farmer in the UK. So we are seeing that happen, but I think we will really need to look very well what can be made more general on a European level and what needs to remain specific and local.
Anybody else? Oh, well, time is arrived to conclude. It is has been a very interesting conference. Well, I still remember that while we are discussing on innovation, considering the importance of EIP program and so on, we still have a policy that assume that the environment is served spending 70% per hectare in a likely equal way across Europe. I don't know if we have, well, which kind of criticism implicitly arrives from this session to the European policymaker that has decided this way of green the agricultural policy and produce sustainability, but well, we can conclude here. Thank you very much for the participation. Light lunch is served upstairs, more or less on top of where we are, where we have had the coffee break this morning. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers.
Microfoni, lasciati.
No, lasciali lì, no. Questa la portiamo via. Pensate non è, mi sembra, quella no, è mezzo tutto è stato. L'unica cosa è quelle spegnere i microfoni e metterli lì, se non sono spenti non si caricano. Sono spenti, non c'è. I computer li spegniamo? No, lascio lì acceso. Grazie. Prendiamoli, tanto ora lasciano i bicchieri. Sì, lasciala, alla fine semmai li togliamo stasera. La temperatura ambiente là. Ma non so se mi sono mangiato, però le posso dire.